Hey everyone. Excuse me. Allergies have been crazy these last 2 days. It has not been fun. Welcome to this Thursday's art therapy. So for those of you who are joining art therapy, I guess only for the second time because we just had our first event last week. Art therapy is a new kind of event or concept here at Sign Hog, and it was something that I introduced here with our recent kind of relaunch. We kind of took a break along with several other, businesses you guys know were impacted by COVID-19, which in turn impacted us, and so things were kind of on hold for a while, but I'm so happy that I'm kind of getting back in the swing of things, and this is kind of a part of that, as well as something new that I've been excited to kind of bring to the craft club. So the big purpose of doing art therapy every week, you guys, is really trying to normalize the conversation and the difficult topics around mental health and emotional wellness. So I know those are kind of big buzzwords right now, especially with the kind of political and social climate the way it is. But there are definitely things that I think are important. And I think the more that we discuss kind of those things that have been previously taboo or that people have been just scared to be vulnerable about, I think the more we normalize that, the easier it can be for people to recover from mental illnesses, from just difficulties in terms of their mental and emotional wellness. I think regardless of whether you have a diagnosable mental illness, we all face challenging times in our lives. And so the purpose of, our art therapy is really to learn about how we can cope, grow, get through kind of those tough times, as well as a space to be vulnerable and normalize, again, those discussions around kind of these difficult topics. So today's topic isn't really a fun one. It's not something I think people get super excited to spend their evening discussing, but I think it's an important one. If you guys haven't already read the title and stuff, tonight's topic will be just identifying impacts of childhood trauma, which is something that I think more and more people are recognizing in their past as we become more aware of how our past and how mental health impacts us today. And so you might be asking yourself, okay, what gives this person who makes signs and what are they doing? What gives them the right to kind of talk about this thing? And so the kind of my background, you guys, to be honest, right, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, I don't have any formal kind of mental health, specialist or recovery type of training, but where I have learned most of the things that I'm going to share with you in these art therapy sessions, in just discussions and things on my page, are through my own personal journey to mental wellness. And emotional well-being, right? So I have struggled throughout my life with depression, anxiety. Eventually, I was formally diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And then I also have anorexia nervosa, which is an eating disorder. And those things are all just kind of additional challenges that I deal with along with kind of the everyday challenges of life. But they are things that I have learned through treatment teams, recovery centers, different places that have helped me kind of learn about what's impacting me, how it's impacting me, how I can learn, grow, overcome, adapt, recognize, how to change my behavior and make for kind of a healthy, mental and emotional state. So not all of this stuff will work for everybody. This is not applicable to everybody, right? There's things that I'm going to say that people, you might not be able to relate to. But I think, again, they're important parts of discussion. They're things that people tend to sweep under the rug, people don't want to talk about. And, you know, art therapy is here to bring that to light. The reason I use art therapy as kind of the title and kind of the framework for all of this is I found art therapy during my recovery journey really important for being able to express my feelings, my ideas, give me a creative way to process things, especially when they got overwhelming. And so I think the creative side of art therapy gives us an opportunity to put some normalcy again around this, right? Taking something normal like crafting and pairing it with a difficult conversation can kind of help bring that to the normal side of things. But it just makes things a little bit easier in terms of coping with a difficult discussion. So I hope that if you guys are watching this, that you are crafting on your own, researching like our craft kits. I have craft kits on the signhog.com store. So if you guys go on there, there's chalk kits as well as paint kits are now available. So you guys can craft right along with me during these sessions. But feel free to grab your favorite craft, whether that's knitting, painting, drawing, clay sculptures, whatever it is, and kick back, relax, and I hope you guys find some of the discussion points useful today. So real quick, you guys, to be honest, I am using a ton of notes because we're going to talk about a lot of important things, and I want to make sure I get them right. I don't want to mess it up. But the first thing before we talk about all the serious stuff, I want to talk about the craft that I'm going to do today. So real quick, I think I'm having a video issue, so bear with me real quick here. Yeah, let me take a moment to fix my video on all of these frames real quick. Alright, bear with me, guys. Alright. Okay. So today's craft is 4th of July themed or Independence Day themed. I did get a little bit of a head start on this, you guys, because this is a layered design. So it takes some time for me to be able to put this all together. So I've done this truck design a couple of times on framed glass, and I actually meant to show an example, so I'll be right back. Okay, so here are two framed glass signs I've done before with this truck. So here's the Easter version that I did. And then here is the Valentine's Day version, right? Super cute truck. You guys might recognize this truck as it was really popular around Christmas time, a little red truck with kind of these Christmas trees in the back. And so Chalk Couture took the kind of red truck design and they added a bunch of add-ons to the transfer. And so for the different seasons, you can get these different add-ons, which I'll talk about here in a minute, to make this. And so again, this is a layered design, which if you guys aren't familiar with, over in my blog there's a post about working with wax and layers to do this. But let me just walk you through kind of the different colors, the different tools, and things that I've used. So these glass frames, they're floating glass picture frames. I bought them at the hobby store. Here we go. Just white. They come in white and black. Pretty cool. And so this is just one of the panels of glass. There's two panels of glass in there, and this is just one of them. And what I have done is, I've got my colors here together, my chalk paste colors, you guys. So I have bright white, which is of course our white paste. I have shimmer silver, which I don't know if it's coming through on the camera very well, but it's glittery, has a shimmer to it. I love that. Cadet, which is what you guys are seeing for the blue on the truck right now. I got Morning Sky out, which is a lighter blue, just in case I wanted to use that. Bark. Okay, this is brown for some boxes. I have another bright white. This one's already open, so I'll start with that one. The other one's new, and it was just in case I run out. Grage, which is this kind of grayish beige color. Love it. And again, I'm using my red ink, which I usually wouldn't recommend you guys, but honestly, I'm just in a pinch. I'm out of red paste. I haven't ordered a new one. And so I'm using the Candy Apple ink. Right, so per usual, I've got my squeegee tools, right, of various kinds. I've got some tape here in case I need to mask anything off. This tape has measuring lines on it, which I absolutely love. Comes in handy when I need to like center things easily. Okay. So the transfer that I'm using, you guys, the truck is the vintage truck. And then I have here the vintage truck add-on for summer. And so this is not the entire transfer because I'll show you guys what that looks like in a minute. But these are the different parts of it. So some fireworks here. Right? These are the boxes that'll go in the back. We'll have some fireworks coming out. And then we'll have some actual fireworks like bursting in the sky. So that's my plan. Again, I did the truck earlier just to kind of speed things up, but to give you guys a gist of what that process looks like. I put the transfer on the frame, chalked the design on. You guys will see that process here momentarily. And then between each layer of kind of these different colors that I did, I applied finishing wax. And so this wax is sold just at the hardware store. But Chalk Couture actually sells a small wax stick. If you guys are only going to do a couple of projects with different layers and things, or don't plan on doing a lot of waxing, then you can get away with using that little chalk stick. But because, of course, I'm doing, you know, bulk kind of signs and different things, I have the larger can. I also have with me my hair dryer because it is super handy for drying the different layers and things in between. So we'll use those things throughout as I layer on the boxes and kind of the fireworks and stuff. But we will kind of get to that. So real quick, I want to show you guys what the transfers for these look like. And so here, okay, let me back up one. Oh, sorry about that, guys. So here is the vintage truck add-on. So the vintage truck add-on is actually just what it says here, the different add-ons for the truck design. So it doesn't look like it's changing on my screen, but there in the screenshot you guys can see it has fireworks, there's a little canoe there, there's fishing poles. You can, you know, basically make the truck into kind of a fishing theme, a surfing theme, as well as like a fireworks or Independence Day theme. And so I absolutely love that. Just the versatility, because you guys look at the vintage truck transfer itself looks like this. So this is a separate transfer, and that's the truck design. But I absolutely just love how versatile it can be. Okay. Love how versatile it can be. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started into the craft session as well as our discussion around the kind of impacts of childhood trauma. So you guys, the reason I chose this particular topic for art therapy today is I read an article, well, let me back up for a second. So if you guys have been watching the news and not living under a rock, or just out in the world lately, you know that the Black Lives Matter movement is getting a ton of attention right now, as it, in my opinion, rightfully should. But I was reading an article about the rioting in particular, which in a lot of cases we're finding is separate from the Black Lives Matter movement. But the rioting and just kind of property destruction that's happening kind of around this framework, right? So I read an article that talked about how violence is a reaction to trauma. Violence and destruction is a reaction to trauma. And that the Black community has faced generations and hundreds of years of this trauma. And it actually used the example of, kids in a classroom, like think kindergartners or preschoolers in a classroom, who get angry, if they're being abused at home, child abuse, or just children in general, if things are not kind of going their way, right? They throw tantrums, they get angry, they have a very, very emotional, out of proportion response when they feel kind of that threat or that danger, right? And this article drew some parallels essentially with kind of the aggressive nature of the protests, especially here in the Washington area, but also the reality of the history of the trauma that is being expressed in a lot of these protests and these riots. And so I thought it was important to kind of reflect on that, because trauma is something, I can definitely relate to. And I wanted to explore that a little bit further and understand, not only the impacts of childhood trauma or trauma early in life, but also the impacts of trauma generationally or in families. And so to kind of start with this, what I did was I pulled open this book. You guys, I'm going to show it real quick. It's Unfuck Your Brain is what it's called, by Faith G. Harper, who has a wonderful array of letters here next to her name. So she is much more qualified on these topics than I am. But this book, you guys can see, I've read it quite a few times. I read this in my most recent kind of surge into my eating disorder recovery and really addressing my trauma. And I feel like this book really was kind of the pivoting point or the turning point for my recovery, because it put things in such a way that I understood what was happening, why I was thinking the way that I was thinking, what trauma means, how trauma impacts us, as well as just the impact of trauma and us on others. So it's a really great book. I highly suggest reading it. But a lot of what I'm about to talk about, you guys, draws from this book, so please don't think that I, drew these connections on my own. These are actually from this book, so please, I highly recommend reading it. Even if you don't have a traumatic past, or you're not, diagnosed with PTSD or anything like that, I think this book is really great in just getting over it, like it says, using science to get over anxiety, depression, anger, freakouts, and triggers. I mean, that's probably relatable for everybody. So, anyways, the first thing I think it's important to understand, what is trauma? And to leave you with a cliffhanger, I'm real quick going to use the hair dryer on these boxes here so I can do the firework layer. Okay, guys. So trauma is an event that happens outside of our understanding of how the world works, or how it's supposed to work, right? So our understanding of how the world is supposed to work. When a light turns green in an intersection, the world, I expect it to work in the fact that all the other cars are stopped and the light is green and I can go. The trauma can be a car accident, somebody running a red light and T-boning you in that intersection, right? That breaks our understanding. That wasn't supposed to happen. So traumatic events are generally things like injury, accidents, near-death experiences, experiencing big loss. So whether that's, personal grief or just a big loss in general, losing, a parent, a child. And also being a witness to or a victim of violence. Right? Those are all things that can be considered as trauma. And guys, trauma doesn't happen to everybody every time they get in a car accident or every time something unexpected happens. Right? Not everybody has what we call a trauma response to trauma. Or some people have a trauma response and then get over it rather quickly, right? Or recover from it rather quickly. But not everybody. Not everybody. And so it's important to understand how that impacts us going forward, right? Trauma doesn't impact us just in that accident, right? It doesn't just impact us when we lose that person in our life. It impacts us going forward, and if it's big enough and traumatic enough and causes ongoing trauma, then it can impact us for months, weeks, years to come, okay? The crazy thing is that according to Faith Harper's book here, they have found that trauma can cause genetic changes down the line and make your genetic lineage predisposed and pre-wired for a trauma response. So back to thinking, you guys, of that article I read when they were talking about the trauma of slaves coming to America and the trauma, the ancestral trauma. It is fact, it is known fact that trauma can cause genetic changes that can be passed down and make you predisposed to having a trauma response. Crazy to think that the trauma and the coping mechanisms and the things that we do today crazy to think how that can impact our children, our children's children, their children, and so on. Right. And so you guys, you can see real quick on this craft, I did not do the big firework there, and that's because it's going off of my frame. So I'm actually peeling it off, and I'm going to turn it and put it on a different way. So I'm going to set that to the side for now. Alright, so now that we understand what trauma is, right, let's talk a little bit about how that impacts us, especially in childhood. Right. So I'm going to cut over to this view. So you guys, this image I saw on the internet the other day, and it's kind of what inspired this topic, bringing up this topic. And so this this image here, it says at the top, whoops, it says at the top, unhealed childhood trauma manifests as. So this is what childhood trauma looks like in someone who has experienced it. Okay. You guys, in the examples I'm going to talk about today, and this is rough, again, super not happy topics here, but I think they're really important. The examples I'm going to use revolve around child abuse, verbal or physical, or even domestic abuse, because I think that that's probably one of the most common that we think about when we think of childhood trauma. We think child abuse or family violence, and so those are kind of the examples that I am going to stick with. Okay. So you can see here, and I'm going to talk about actually the bottom one first. Difficulty setting boundaries is kind of a, for lack of a better word, a symptom of childhood trauma. And so what that means is that a person, right, is going to struggle, that has experienced childhood trauma, is going to struggle to make healthy choices for themselves and set boundaries for themselves in respect to their own well-being. So this can look like a lot of different things, but it could potentially be, you know, in the case of kind of domestic violence or spousal abuse, right? Difficulty setting boundaries is, you know, no, you can't call me after this time. You can't text me after this time. You can't walk into my house whenever you want. You can't, you know, tell me where I can and can't go. So setting boundaries. And I'm not saying that, oh, you have a difficult time setting boundaries if you're in an abusive relationship. Like, no, obviously there's bigger problems there. But just an example of, if somebody is traumatized, it's not going to be easy for them to stand up to somebody else. Just so you guys know, this was a candy apple ink that I'm using here. So this may just be super runny, but I wanted to try it and see how it worked out, or potentially didn't work out. But the interesting thing is, about boundaries specifically, is that people who are traumatized tend to be really familiar with what the boundaries are. Right? That's generally how, especially in childhood, in the case of child abuse, that's how a child knows how to avoid negative consequences. Right? They know exactly what the boundaries are, what they are allowed and not allowed to do to avoid violent and terrifying consequences. And so as an adult, when we have difficulty setting boundaries, what this can look like is picking people to be in our lives that are very similar to the people who treated us negatively. Because if that is what you are used to, you kind of only know that box to fit in. You only know how to be a submissive and quiet victim. You don't know how to set a boundary and how to stand up for yourself. And so you generally are going to attract people and be attracted to people, and I don't mean that in a conscious, sexual, weird way at all. I just mean we are naturally going to gravitate towards things that we are familiar with. Okay? And then we generally have unhealthy coping skills to deal with the trauma of these, right? So if we look at this list here, you guys, one of the things you may realize or recognize here is that there's a lot of characteristics that we can use to describe the opposite person in this scenario. So this picture talks about an abused child or a person who has experienced abuse in childhood. But if we think about the person abusing the child or abusing that person, they are likely narcissistic. They are abusive. They have a need for others to want to prove themselves, right? They like it when other people feel like they need their approval. They want people to prioritize their needs, right? They want to create a fear of abandonment. So when we think of like the opposite type of person that creates this in childhood, it's pretty scary. It's pretty scary. And what I have found is trauma kind of teaches us or helps us find what is the path of least resistance, right? I'm tired of getting my ass beat. How do I avoid that the next time around? Go without dinner and don't complain and scrub the floors and do this XYZ, this, that, and the other. It's the path of least resistance. So I think it's important to recognize how that relationship between a victim and an abuser can define relationships that we might have in the future. And with that, you guys, I am going to pause again for the hair dryer. A couple of other things on this list that we can talk about. A fear of abandonment, living on high alert. Those are both symptoms of trauma in a way that some people might not realize or think about very much. So, a lot of people, they can kind of sympathize or empathize with, my dad walked out on me when I was a little kid, and now I have a fear of abandonment because I think everybody is going to walk out on me, right? That can be somewhat understandable, right? You understand, like, where that comes from. But living on high alert, right? That comes out in a lot of ways. It comes out in anxiety, it comes out in paranoia, it comes out in little weird behaviors and habits, right? To make us feel safe, or to make us feel like people aren't going to leave us. Living on high alert, fear of abandonment, those are generally reactions, direct reactions to trauma that's probably very similar. So being left, or you feel like you need to be on high alert because you were in danger once and you didn't catch on, so now you feel like you're always in danger. So what's interesting is those can be impacts of trauma after a traumatic event. Those can be, while you're experiencing a traumatic event. Or those can even be things that you did before your trauma. Very interesting. Deprioritizing your own needs. That's a really interesting one, I think. You would think somebody who has experienced trauma and been, maybe literally beaten down. It's interesting that they beat themselves down, too, and deprioritize their own needs. And that, again, is a safety measure, I think. And it's a way to protect themselves of, as long as you don't need anything, then you're not going to bother me, right? If you don't need a punching bag, you're not going to bother me. If you don't need someone to scream at, you're not going to bother me. So let me make sure that I don't have a reason for you to do any of those things. And deprioritize all of my needs so I can make sure your needs are filled so I don't get the butt end of it. And you guys, just so you know, I'm not experiencing any of this actively, right? But it's just easier for me to, I think, talk in the first person. So, codependency, people pleasing, fixing others. Interesting how a lot of these things go together, right? A lot of these things go together. And interestingly enough, if you know enough about psychology and trauma, a lot of this has to do with, in a way, trying to be in control. If I'm on high enough alert, right? If I'm making sure everything else is taken care of. If I'm people pleasing, if I'm making sure everyone around me is fixed, then nothing can go wrong. Then this won't happen to me again. When it's not true, but it's the only thing that a traumatized brain really knows how to do, right? It's the only way a traumatized brain knows how to protect itself, and it's to do what it's always done. And so childhood trauma does express itself a lot in adulthood. And a lot like what you guys are seeing here. So, one more time with the hairdryer. Alright, you guys, so here is my piece, and I'm going to put some scrapbook paper behind it. I'm also going to do this second layer on the firework design. Unfortunately, we are out of time for the evening, so I can't quite wrap it up, but I will make sure to post a finished picture in the group when I'm done. Oh, let's see if I can lift this up off of my table here. Might be stuck. Oh, I guess I don't know if I can get this off. Ah, there we go. Alright. So you guys can see my boxes, my fireworks. I think I'm going to put the fireworks kind of across the top. I think that'll be really cute. So you guys, thanks again so much for joining me in the discussion and just being open to hearing about the hard stuff and being a part of the hard talks and being willing to open yourself up to a different experience that may be very different from your own, especially if you've never experienced trauma of any kind. But I think it's important because not only can you help yourself, you could potentially help a friend, a family member, a coworker, a stranger, someone you love. And again, I want to normalize these topics and these conversations, and I want people to be aware of how we can impact others, how we can help others, how we impact ourselves, and how we can heal from the struggle, the one that everybody faces, the struggle of being human and being vulnerable. And I just want to thank you for being a part of it. So you guys, I hope you will join me next week, Thursday again, for art therapy. Sunday, I will be going live for an eye candy and inspiration live stream over on YouTube. And so I hope you guys will check that out on Sunday. And if you guys have suggestions for topics that you want to learn about in art therapy, whether it's something that you're struggling with or you're just curious to learn about that's mental health related or emotional well-being related, please send the ideas my way. I'm happy to do research and start looking into things, and look forward to kind of growing on this mental health journey with you all. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening and enjoy making something beautiful. Thanks for joining me, and have a great night.